Aging and disease are biochemical processes that happen over many decades. So if we track and optimize well-established biomarkers of organ and systemic health, can aging and disease risk be slowed? So with that in mind, in late October, I blood tested for the 7th time in 2024. And note that this is test number 55 since August of 2015. So with that in mind, what's my biological age? That's what we'll see here. This is using Dr. Morgan Levine's biological age calculator, PhenoAge. And this test is important for many reasons. One is that it's associated with chronological age, or strongly associated with chronological age. A higher biological age using this test is associated with an increased risk of death for all causes, and it includes multiple biomarkers of many different organ systems, which addresses the central premise of this channel. In terms of those biomarkers, they include 2 markers of liver health and function, so albumin and alkaline phosphatase, ALP, kidney function, creatinine, metabolic health, glucose, inflammation, high sensitivity C-reactive protein, 2 measures related to white blood cells, WBCs, the lymphocyte percentage, which is total lymphocytes divided by WBCs, and obviously WBCs, and then 2 measures of or related to red blood cells, the MCV, which is the average red blood cell volume, and then the RDW, or red blood cell distribution width, which is a measure of the variation in red blood cell volume. So if you want to calculate your own biological age using this test, there's a free downloadable Excel file so you can calculate it whenever you want. You don't have to enter an email like some other online sites do. There's a downloadable link in a link from my blog or my website in the video's description. So when entering these data, I get a biological age of 36.5 years, which is 15.2 years younger than the chronological. Now, the theoretical maximum reduction for chronological age versus biological age using this test is 20 years. So 15 years younger is about 75% of the maximum reduction that one can have using this test. So not bad. But note that this is just one test. And it's important to not get too high or too low with just one test because, in my opinion, tracking year-to-year change is more important. So with that in mind, let's take a look at biological age results using this test since 2018, as I have 36 tests over that time period, which is what we'll see here. So in 2018 to 2019, I tested 3 times with an average biological age of 36.1 years. But then 3 tests over a 2-year span is probably not enough data to track year-to-year change. So I started testing more often. For 6 tests each in 2020 and 2021, biological age using this metric was 35.6 years. So 35.6 at that time was probably a closer representation to a full year average relative to the 36.1 in 2018 to 2019. I then started to increase testing, adding a 7th test in 2022. And I had my best data yet with an average biological age of 33.8 years. In 2023, it got a small amount worse, 34.7 years over 7 tests. And over the first 7 tests thus far in 2024, it's close to the same as last year, 34.9. So note that even if all biomarkers stay the same using this test, PhenoAge increases by 0.9 years for every year of chronological year that passes. In other words, starting in 2020, I should expect to see an average PhenoAge in 2024 of 39.2 years, so 0.9 multiplied by 4 years, and then adding that to 35.6. In contrast, I've avoided an age-related biological age increase, which suggests that I've improved these biomarkers, resisting age-related changes over the past 4+ years. All right, so rather than just looking at data entered into a spreadsheet, let's take a look at the full blood test report. And that's what we'll see here. This is page 1 of the report. Now note that I don't go to my doctor to get these data or to order the tests. I go to ultalabtest.com where I pick the test that I want. I then bring that form to Quest Diagnostics, which does the blood draw, and then I get the results relatively quickly. So I tested on a Friday morning, and I had these results within 1 day or the next day on Saturday. If you want to support the channel while testing yourself, there's an affiliate link in the video's description. All right, so some highlights and then room for improvement. So one highlight is HDL at 63, which is pretty close to the optimal range of 50 to 60 for men. And if you missed that video, I'll link to it in the right corner. So besides just being close to the optimal range for HDL, it's also now the 12th test in a row where HDL is greater than or equal to 50 milligrams per deciliter. And that's important because for the previous 43 tests since 2015, my average HDL was about 10 to 11 milligrams per deciliter lower at 44.7. So I've been able to consistently keep HDL relatively higher and closer to that optimal range over the past around 2 years. Triglycerides improved test over test from 60s and 70s for the past couple of tests to 57, and values around 40 or less is associated with lowest risk for coronary heart disease mortality. So the goal is to get it to 40 or less. So 57 is on the right track. HSCRP at 0.2 milligrams per liter. This is now 20 tests in a row where my HSCRP is less than the lab's limit of detection, less than 0.3 milligrams per liter, or less than or equal to 0.3 milligrams per liter. And then also glucose at 90, which increased from 87 over the past test. But note that my 53 test average glucose since 2015 is 89.6 milligrams per deciliter. So 90 is right there. It's essentially my average over the past 9 years. So that's good news. On to page 2. Creatinine at 0.98 is not my lowest in 2024. I had values of 0.82, and lower is better. It suggests better kidney function. And on the other side, though, this is close to my average since 2015, as creatinine average is 0.95. Now, if 0.82 was significantly better than 0.98, or 0.98 got significantly worse in terms of kidney function, I'd expect to see increases for biomarkers such as blood urea nitrogen and uric acid, which increase in the presence of suboptimal kidney function. So in my case, blood urea nitrogen is actually towards the lower end of my range at 9 milligrams per deciliter, is relatively low too. So that didn't increase. And uric acid, you can see that the lab flagged it as low, so that's not high either, or relatively higher. So the 0.98 for creatinine, even though that's on the high side relative to my average and the last couple tests in 2024, the other biomarkers suggest that kidney function is not adversely affected. And in terms of uric acid, or in terms of the lab flagging uric acid as low, I covered that in the last video in this series, blood test number 6. And if you missed it, I'll link to that in the right corner. So some other highlights: albumin at 5.0, once again, youthful. And then liver enzymes. So AST and ALT, I've had some issues with them being in the mid-20s, which is a bit high because AST and ALT have U-shaped associations with all-cause mortality risk. So too low can be increased risk. Too high can be increased risk, with optimal being around the bottom of the U, somewhere in the high teens to low 20s. So that's now true for AST, but it's not true for ALT. 15 would be increased risk relative to values in the high teens, low 20s. Now, a better marker of kidney health and function may be GGT. And in an earlier blood test, it was relatively low, which suggests that ALT and AST that we see here may not be that big of a deal. But to confirm, I'll likely include GGT at future tests, as it's easier to interpret. It's lower is better, and as it increases, it's linearly associated with an increased all-cause mortality risk. I'm also tracking thyroid hormones, so you can see free T4 and free T3. Free T3 is the active form of thyroid hormone, and unfortunately, the conversion of free T4 into free T3 declines during aging, so I'm tracking that ratio. Now, for this test, these results are my lowest ratio over 5 tests that I've measured it in 2024. So I'll go to the correlations, which I post on Patreon following every blood test, to see what I can do to improve the free T3 to free T4 ratio in my data. All right, the MCV at 93.5 came down from the last test by a small amount, 94.7. And that may be in part because I followed a correlation with cocoa bean intake. Relatively higher intake is significantly correlated with a lower MCV in my data. Now, I can't say if that's causation, that there may be many factors, but I'd like to get my MCV lower to the lower end of my range as it increases during aging, and relatively higher values are associated with an increased all-cause mortality risk. So as of right now, MCV is a weak spot that I'm looking to improve. On the other side, though, the RDW is a youthful 12, and that's one reason for my relatively young pheno age, as that's a major driver of that biological age test, or that the calculation involved in that biological age test. Also note lymphocytes. So I had 3 tests with lymphocytes less than 1,600 in 2024. This is now the second test in a row where they're close to 1,900, and note that optimal is around 2,000. Lymphocytes decline during aging, so having 3 tests less than 1,600 is going in the wrong direction, whereas for the past 2 tests, including this test, it's moving closer to that optimal of around 2,000. And then DHEA sulfate at 126 might be a bit low, and I'm not sure about that. So androgens decline during aging. And in my data, I have a couple of data points from about 15 years ago where they were at 300. But I was also experimenting with supplementing with DHEA. So I don't know, and I was far from as rigorous as I am now at tracking everything that I take in. So I don't know if that 300 was because I was supplementing with DHEA or that was my natural youthful level. If it was my natural youthful level, the goal is to get it back from 126 to 300. And first, without using DHEA, I want to see if I can rejuvenate my body's ability to get me back there. On the other side, I want to resist any age-related decline, knowing that androgens, including DHEA sulfate, decline during aging. So with that in mind, 126 is almost identical to my 17-test DHEA sulfate average over the past 26 months. So I've been able to resist an age-related decline over the past 2+ years. All right, so what might be contributing to these data? What diet and supplements correspond to a 15-year younger biological age? And I'll cover that in the next video. All right, that's all for now. If you're interested in more about my attempts to biohack aging, check us out on Patreon, where I offer blood test consults for those who want to optimize biomarkers with the goal of improving or optimizing their health and potentially longevity. We've also got a bunch of discount and affiliate links that you can use to test yourself while also helping to support the channel, including altalabtest.com, where I generate the majority of my blood tests or get the majority of my blood tests, Clearly Filtered, which is the water filter that I use, epigenetic testing, oral microbiome composition, NAD testing with Ginfinity, at-home metabolomics, at-home blood testing with Cyfox Health, which includes ApoB, but also GrimAge, the DNA methylation test GrimAge, green tea, diet tracking with Chronometer, or if you'd like to support the channel, you can do that with the website Buy Me a Coffee. We've also got merch, so if you're interested in wearing the ConquerAging or Diet Trying brand, as I've got on here, that link and all the other links will be in the video's description. Thanks for watching. I hope that you enjoyed the video. Have a great day.